Imagine for a moment the life you once knew, the comfort, the security, the freedom to speak what you believe, to worship as you choose. Forget all of it. We are transporting you now to the 1st century CE, to Rome, the very heart of the empire, and into the soul of an ordinary man who dared to become a follower of a new, dangerous faith. Before you lie a dramatic 24 hours. Every moment carries peril. Every whisper is suspicion. Every shadow hides a threat. Would you endure? Would you last just 24 hours as a Christian during the height of the Roman persecutions? Prepare to feel fear, to feel faith, and to ask yourself, what would you do? The night hung thick and starless over the iron-tiled roofs of Rome. A cold wind whipped through the streets, carrying the mingled scents of grime and unfulfilled dreams. For most citizens of Rome, this was just another twilight, a prelude to tomorrow's toil in the forum, haggling in the marketplace, or perhaps the thrilling brutality of the impending games at the Colosseum. But for some, for us, it was a signal, a call to gather in the darkness. My name was Marcus. I was an ordinary man, a carpenter by trade. Life hadn't particularly favored me, nor had it overly punished me. Not until a few months ago, when I first heard of him, of Jesus. And from that moment, my life became a silent prayer and a relentless peril. Before we continue with this story, if you enjoy this content, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if you honestly mean it. On this particular night, before the first hint of dawn, I made my way to our meeting place. Every step was measured, every sound carefully registered. There were no comfortable beds we rose from. Often it was the hard ground, or a borrowed, flea-ridden mat in someone's cramped, shared room. Our morning routine was devoid of luxury, no running water, no private facilities, just a designated area outside, always with one eye open for an unexpected encounter. Hygiene was a luxury we rarely afforded, a detail almost comically trivial when death lurked around every corner. I slipped into a secluded, almost invisible workshop, which by day served for the repair of ceramic vessels. Inside, behind a heavy, bolted wooden door, stood Antonius, a shipwright, holding a flickering candle. His face, weathered by the winds and salt of the Tiber, lit up in recognition. "Brother," he murmured, quietly ushering me in, the heavy door thudding shut behind me, plunging us into deeper yet safer darkness. What lay behind that door was not merely a room, but a sanctuary. A small group, perhaps 15 souls, was already gathered. They were people like me, weavers, fishermen, slaves who had somehow managed to purchase their freedom, even a noblewoman, Livia, whose presence was a quiet miracle in itself. All were seated on the hard, cold floor, legs crossed, their faces illuminated by the feeble glow of a few oil lamps. The air was stale, damp, permeated with the scent of wax, damp earth, and an underlying current of fear, but also undeniably hope. We greeted each other in hushed tones, palms pressed to chests, our gazes filled with a profound understanding. There were no boisterous hugs, no loud welcomes. Every rustle was a potential danger. Every distant cry from the street, every heavy tread echoing above us, made us stiffen, listen, our hearts hammering a frantic rhythm against our ribs. Antonius opened an old, crude wooden chest, reverently retrieving rough clay bowls and a small, brittle piece of dried bread. "The body of Christ broken for us," he whispered, breaking the bread with his calloused hands, "and his blood poured out for forgiveness. It was a humble, unadorned Lord's Supper, stripped of all pomp and ceremony, yet filled with an overwhelming sense of awe and sacred reverence. This was our strength. This was our secret. This was the source of our defiant hope. After our shared, whispered prayer, we read. I carefully unrolled the scroll. It wasn't easy under the dim light to decipher the tiny, meticulously inscribed letters. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. My voice was hoarse from the lingering tension, but the words resonated deeply in our hearts. They weren't just words, they were a roadmap for survival, a promise of an ultimate victory. Some softly hummed hymns, almost inaudible melodies that carried stories of Jesus' miracles, his resurrection, his unwavering love. Every testimony, every verse was a tiny flicker of light in the profound darkness that enveloped us. Young Hannah, a girl no older than 10, dozed fitfully, leaning against her mother's side, her small hand tightly clutching a rough carved wooden fish, our secret symbol of faith. Old Jove, once a respected scholar, now a man bent by age and sorrow, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness, yet also a strange, persistent peace, spoke of the Apostle Peter. I saw him, brothers, he whispered, his voice thin but clear. There was nothing outwardly special about him, an ordinary fisherman, but when he spoke of Christ, then he was like a torrent. He told us that suffering would come, that it would be painful, but that it was the path. His words echoed in my mind. These people weren't superheroes. They were ordinary people who had encountered something extraordinary. They weren't naturally brave, naturally gifted, or naturally suited for martyrdom. They became apostles not because of who they were, but because of who they followed. In that fleeting moment, our community was everything. We were family, we were the church, and in that sacred fellowship, fear would recede, if only for a brief, precious time. I felt a warmth spread through me, a deep connection with these people who risked everything, just as I did, simply to share a humble meal and a few words of forbidden hope. But there was always that pervasive sensation, the constant vigilance, every rustle from outside, every distant footstep that echoed above us, made us stiffen, look at each other, listen intently, because we knew with chilling certainty that in an instant our warmth could turn to ash, our hope to agony, and our secret gathering to our last. Tomorrow was uncertain. Uncertainty was the only certainty. The pale light of dawn crept over Rome, chasing away the shadows that had guarded our secret gathering. With a silent prayer and a quiet farewell to my brothers and sisters in Christ, I emerged from the hidden workshop, blending back into the burgeoning life of the city. The usual clamor of the market was already beginning, the shouts of vendors, the braying of donkeys, the distant clang of blacksmiths. For a few hours, I was just Marcus, the carpenter, unremarkable in my simple tunic, my hands busy with planks of wood and chisels. My mind, however, still hummed with the sacred words, the shared hope, the quiet strength found in the catacombs. It was a fragile peace, a temporary disguise. My workday began like any other. I was shaping a sturdy table leg for a merchant, the scent of fresh-cut cedar filling my nostrils. The rhythmic scraping of my tools was a comfort, a mundane anchor in a life that held such dangerous secrets. Around me, life continued its predictable course. Children played loudly in the street, their laughter echoing off the stone buildings. Women haggled over prices for olives and fish. Roman citizens, oblivious to the quiet revolution stirring beneath their very feet, went about their daily lives, secure in the might of their empire. Then a shift, subtle at first, a faint smell, acrid and sharp, that wasn't the usual cooking fires. A distant plume of smoke, a dark smudge against the clear Roman sky. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, growing louder, more frantic. "Fire! A fire in the district near the Circus Maximus!" The words spread like wildfire themselves, igniting panic. The smell intensified, thick and choking. The smoke billowed, black and ominous, blotting out the sun. In moments, the distant murmur escalated into a roar of screams, a cacophony of fear. The great fire had begun. It swept through the city with terrifying speed, devouring wooden tenements, grand villas, and ancient temples alike. The heat was immense, a living, breathing monster. I dropped my tools, my carpentry forgotten. Instinct took over. I joined the throngs of people, not fleeing, but running towards the inferno, trying to help. I pulled terrified neighbors from collapsing buildings, soaked blankets and precious water barrels to beat back the advancing flames, carried shrieking children through smoke-filled alleys. The chaos was absolute. The very heart of Rome was a burning, screaming inferno. For 6 days and 7 nights, the city burned. When it was over, vast swathes of Rome were reduced to smoldering ruins. The morning after the worst of the flames had subsided was a landscape of ash and despair. A profound, unsettling silence hung over the devastated districts, broken only by the crackle of lingering embers and the mournful cries of the homeless. I sat amidst the rubble of what had once been my street, my face streaked with soot, my body aching with exhaustion, my heart heavy with the enormity of the destruction. How could anything good come from such ruin? But soon a new, more insidious kind of fire began to spread, not of wood and stone, but of whispers and lies. The Emperor Nero, desperate to deflect suspicion from himself, for many believed he had orchestrated the blaze to clear land for his grand golden palace, needed a scapegoat. And the Christians, with our secret meetings, our refusal to worship the Roman gods, our strange talk of a heavenly king and drinking blood, were the perfect target. The rumor spread like a plague. The Christians did it. They hate mankind. They set the city ablaze to bring about the end of the world, as their twisted prophecies foretell. Nero's agents, his propagandists, ensured the lies found fertile ground in the terrified, grieving populace. Panic quickly mutated into raw, festering hatred. I felt the change immediately. The faces of neighbors who, just yesterday, had accepted my help, now turned cold, suspicious. Their eyes, once grateful, now held a chilling glint of accusation. A woman I had helped carry water for her dying child now recoiled when I offered comfort, muttering, You are one of them, aren't you? A follower of the Christ." Her voice was low, filled with fear and nascent fury. The whispers intensified. They refused to help. They sang hymns while Rome burned. Utter fabrications, but believed by a populace desperate for answers, desperate for someone to blame. The public's initial shock hardened into a venomous rage directed squarely at us, the followers of the Nazarene. And then came the soldiers, Roman legionaries, their discipline a terrifying contrast to the city's chaos, moved through the devastated districts with grim determination. They were not looking for survivors, but for scapegoats. Their methods were brutal, their justice swift and unforgiving. They knocked on doors, dragged people from their homes, guided by the fingers of fearful, vindictive neighbors. "He goes to secret meetings," someone would cry. "She won't offer incense to Caesar," another would shout. I saw them approaching my street, their bronze helmets glinting ominously in the smoky air. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum of terror. I knew this was it, the hidden life, the whispered prayers, the quiet defiance. It was all over. The veil had been torn. From the shadow of the catacombs, I was now exposed, an open target for the wrath of an empire and a populace consumed by fear and lies. How could I possibly escape this? How could anyone escape this? The tension was unbearable, a knot in my stomach. The question was no longer if they would come for me, but when, and what would happen when they did. Would I stand firm, or would I crumble under the immense weight of persecution? It was not long before the heavy boot of a Roman soldier splintered my door. My heart leapt into my throat, a suffocating fear. The air in my cramped dwelling filled with the acrid smell of sweat and fear. There were no polite greetings, no gentle requests, just brusque commands and the cold glint of polished bronze. I was dragged out, my hands bound roughly behind my back, my carpenter's tools scattered on the floor behind me, useless now. I was just one of many. All around me I saw other terrified faces, some familiar from the catacombs, others strangers, snatched from their homes under suspicion. A woman I knew, Martha, was among them, her young son, no older than 5, clutching her tunic, his eyes wide with terror. Old Simon, a baker known for his gentle spirit, stood beside her, his usually flour-dusted hands now trembling. We were pushed, jostled, and marched through the ruined streets. The air was thick with the dust of destruction and the growing chorus of angry shouts from the Roman populace. "Christiani ad leones," they roared, "Christians to the lions." The accusation was a condemnation. We were taken to the local precinct, a temporary holding area set up in a half-burned administrative building. The single room was already crowded, dark and damp, smelling of fear and unwashed bodies. We huddled together, a pathetic cluster of humanity, our whispered prayers a desperate comfort in the face of overwhelming despair. Each new person pushed into the cell meant another life in danger, another soul facing the ultimate test. The very air seemed to press down on us heavy with the weight of our collective doom. The stench of desperation was palpable, clinging to the rough stone walls and the desperate silent figures within. Time itself seemed to crawl, each tick of the mental clock a drawn-out agony. Hours stretched into an eternity. The sun, which had risen with such deceptive promise, now seemed to mock us through the single barred window. Then came the dreaded call, my name, Marcus, the carpenter. I was pulled from the huddle, my legs feeling like lead, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A chill ran down my spine, a premonition of what was to come. I was led into a smaller, colder room. Before me sat a Roman centurion, his face stern and impassive, his armor gleaming, reflecting the dim light. This was Brutus, the very centurion whose cold gaze had so often ignited Marcus's youthful anger by the Galilean lake. His presence was a stark reminder of the empire's relentless grip. Beside him stood a scribe, quill poised over a wax tablet. The air was heavy with the scent of oil lamps and the cold, metallic smell of Roman authority. There was no mercy in his eyes, only cold, calculating efficiency. He exuded an almost predatory calm, the kind that hinted at vast unchecked power and an eagerness to use it. "So you are one of them," the centurion began, his Latin precise and chilling. "A follower of this Christ, this Nazarene who died like a common criminal. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, laced with a sneer. Do you worship this Christ? This criminal? The question hung in the air, echoing in the cold cell. It was simple, direct, and utterly terrifying. My throat tightened. The temptation to lie to save myself was a burning ache in my chest. My mind raced. I saw Martha's terrified son, Simon's trembling hands. I remembered the words of Peter, spoken in hushed tones in the catacombs. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. But also, the agonizing choice. Some of the terrified prisoners I had seen in the common cell were already considering recanting. Whispers of denial, of saving families, of just saying the words to survive, floated among them. I felt the immense weight of their dilemma, the human instinct to survive, to protect one's loved ones. This was the psychological warfare, just as brutal as any physical torment. They sought not just our deaths, but the death of our convictions, the public humiliation of our God, the utter eradication of our beliefs. Their goal was to break our spirits, not just our bodies. Why do you persist in this madness? Brutus continued, his voice rising, a sneer on his lips, his eyes boring into mine. Why do you cling to this obscure sect? You are accused of hatred against mankind, of atrocious crimes, of perverted customs. He was repeating the very accusations that fueled the populace's rage, the rumors of Christians drinking blood, engaging in incestuous rites, and plotting the destruction of Rome. He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. You refuse to worship the emperor, the very embodiment of Rome's power. You worship an invisible God, a God who offers no protection from our legions, no glory on the battlefield. You undermine the very foundations of our society. Your very existence is an affront to Roman order, a challenge to our very way of life. You are an enemy of the state, a pestilence that must be purged. His voice grew louder, trying to dominate my thoughts, to break my will. He gestured to a small altar in the corner of the room upon which stood a bust of Caesar and a flickering brazier. The choice is simple, Carpenter. Prone yourself, offer a pinch of incense to the emperor, say the words, Caesar is Lord, deny your Christ. Your life will be spared, your family will be safe, you will walk free. This is your last chance, Marcus. A small gesture, a few words, and you can return to your pathetic life. What is your God to you compared to your own breath, your own family? Is a phantom king worth this suffering, worth the tears of your loved ones? He leaned back, a smug look on his face, convinced that no sane man would refuse such an offer, that basic human instinct would win out over any abstract faith. This was it, the moment of truth, the crushing weight of choice. My heart pounded, a deafening drum against my ribs. To deny him, to say those words, it would buy me life. It would buy my family freedom, but at what cost to my soul? The words of Peter, of the apostles, of Christ himself, flooded my mind. Whoever denies me before men, I will deny before my Father in heaven. I saw the cross, not as a symbol of defeat, but as the ultimate act of defiant love, of unwavering devotion. The choice was stark, a few more years of earthly life, or an eternity with my Lord. The vision of Hannah's innocent face, Martha's weary but determined gaze filled my mind. They were not just followers, they were beacons. If I faltered, what hope would they have? So you are one of them, the centurion began, his Latin precise and chilling. A follower of this Christ. this Nazarene who died like a common criminal. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, laced with a sneer. Do you worship this Christ? This criminal? The question hung in the air, echoing in the cold cell. It was simple, direct, and utterly terrifying. My throat tightened. The temptation to lie to save myself was a burning ache in my chest. My mind raced. I saw Martha's terrified son, Simon's trembling hands. I remembered the words of Peter, spoken in hushed tones in the catacombs. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. But also, the agonizing choice. Some of the terrified prisoners I had seen in the common cell were already considering recanting. Whispers of denial, of saving families, of just saying the words to survive, floated among them. I felt the immense weight of their dilemma, the human instinct to survive, to protect one's loved ones. This was the psychological warfare, just as brutal as any physical torment. They sought not just our deaths, but the death of our convictions, the public humiliation of our God, the utter eradication of our beliefs. Their goal was to break our spirits, not just our bodies. Why do you persist in this madness? Brutus continued, his voice rising, a sneer on his lips, his eyes boring into mine. Why do you cling to this obscure sect? You are accused of hatred against mankind, of atrocious crimes, of perverted customs. He was repeating the very accusations that fueled the populace's rage, the rumors of Christians drinking blood, engaging in incestuous rites, and plotting the destruction of Rome. He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. You refuse to worship the emperor, the very embodiment of Rome's power. You worship an invisible God, a God who offers no protection from our legions, no glory on the battlefield. You undermine the very foundations of our society. Your very existence is an affront to Roman order, a challenge to our very way of life. You are an enemy of the state, a pestilence that must be purged. His voice grew louder, trying to dominate my thoughts, to break my will. He gestured to a small altar in the corner of the room upon which stood a bust of Caesar and a flickering brazier. The choice is simple, Carpenter. Prone yourself, offer a pinch of incense to the emperor, say the words, Caesar is Lord. Deny your Christ. Your life will be spared. Your family will be safe. You will walk free. This is your last chance, Marcus. A small gesture, a few words, and you can return to your pathetic life. What is your God to you compared to your own breath, your own family? Is a phantom king worth this suffering, worth the tears of your loved ones? He leaned back, a smug look on his face, convinced that no sane man would refuse such an offer, that basic human instinct would win out over any abstract faith. This was it, the moment of truth, the crushing weight of choice. My heart pounded, a deafening drum against my ribs. To deny him, to say those words, it would buy me life. It would buy my family freedom, but at what cost to my soul? The words of Peter, of the apostles, of Christ himself, flooded my mind. Whoever denies me before men, I will deny before my Father in heaven. I saw the cross, not as a symbol of defeat, but as the ultimate act of defiant love, of unwavering devotion. The choice was stark, a few more years of earthly life, or an eternity with my Lord. The vision of Hannah's innocent face, Martha's weary but determined gaze filled my mind. They were not just followers, they were beacons. If I faltered, what hope would they have? The air in the interrogation room grew heavy, suffocating. The centurion's gaze was fixed on me, cold and unyielding. The silence stretched, filled only by the frantic beat of my own heart. This was the precipice. This was the moment I would either stand with Christ or fall away into the abyss of compromise and denial, of fate worse than any death. I knew with chilling certainty that this would be my last choice on earth. My body trembled, not just from cold, but from the immense fear that gripped my very being. The image of the arena, of the wild beasts, of the jeering crowds flashed before my eyes. But then another image. The quiet faces in the catacombs, their whispered hymns, the unwavering hope in Antonius's eyes, Hannah's innocent face clutching her wooden fish, and finally the image of him on the cross, forgiving those who crucified him, extending grace even in his agony. A strength I did not know I possessed surged through me. My voice, though a mere whisper, was firm, resonant with a resolve that surprised even myself, a divine conviction that settled deep within my bones. I cannot, I said, meeting Brutus's impassive gaze, holding it steady, refusing to break. There is only one Lord, and he is Christ. No Caesar, no man, no earthly power can take that truth from my heart. My allegiance is not to this world, but to the kingdom that is to come. The centurion's face hardened, losing all trace of the slight, almost imperceptible curiosity it had held, replaced by a cold, resigned finality. He gave a curt nod to the scribe, his voice devoid of any emotion. Mark it down, refused, death sentence, take him away. The grim reality descended upon me. My choice was made, my fate sealed. I was no longer just Marcus, the carpenter. I was a condemned man, a Christian. They dragged me back to the general holding cell, now even more crowded with new arrivals, their faces etched with the same terror, the same despair. The hours passed like lead. The sounds of distant crowds grew louder, more frantic, like the roaring of hungry beasts. They were preparing the spectacle. The air thrummed with a grotesque anticipation, a dark energy feeding on human suffering. It was in the darkest hour, just before dawn, that they came for us again. The guards, their faces grim, dragged us out into the cold night air. The entire city seemed to be awake, illuminated by a chilling, unnatural glow. My eyes adjusted, and I saw it. Not the Colosseum, but the infamous gardens of Nero. A horrific, beautiful stage for his depraved entertainment. Lines of wooden poles, smeared with pitch, stretched into the distance, awaiting their human kindling. This was the emperor's private theater of cruelty, where human lives were mere props. In his monstrous amusement, a testament to his utter disregard for life. We were forced into crude tunics soaked in flammable oil. Some were already being led away, their terrified cries swallowed by the night. Others, dressed in the skins of wild beasts, were thrown into enclosures where hungry, snarling dogs paced restlessly, their growls a chilling prelude to what awaited, their eyes glinting with a savage hunger. The air was thick with the scent of fear, of pitch, and of impending death. Emperor Nero himself was there, a grotesque figure in his imperial robes holding court, surrounded by his sycophants, his face illuminated by the flickering light of burning torches. He watched, a satisfied smirk on his lips, as the horror unfolded, a grim parody of a Roman carnival, a testament to his twisted enjoyment of suffering. He played his lyre, they said, as Rome burned, and now he orchestrated this macabre ballet of human agony. I saw Martha and her son. She clutched him to her, her face pale, but her eyes held a fierce, desperate love, a mother's last defiance against the encroaching darkness. Simon the baker stood beside them, his eyes closed in prayer, his lips moving in silent supplication, finding solace in the unseen. The crowd, the Roman populace, roared with a mixture of excitement and bloodlust, a chilling symphony of human depravity, their shouts echoing like a death knell in the night. Yet I saw something else too. A few faces in the crowd, their expressions contorted not in joy but in horror and disgust. Even some Romans, as the historian Tacitus would later record, began to feel pity, witnessing such immense, senseless cruelty inflicted on innocent people. Nero's spectacle was so extreme, so inhuman, that it began to turn even his own populace against him, sowing the first seeds of doubt in their absolute loyalty. As they bound me to one of the stakes, the rough ropes biting into my wrists, I looked up, not at the sneering face of Nero, not at the jeering crowd, but at the dark, vast expanse of the sky, a silent witness to our suffering, a profound sense of peace, a peace that transcended all earthly pain enveloped me. It was the same peace I had felt in the catacombs, amplified 1,000-fold, a divine comfort in the face of ultimate despair. The words of Christ, so simple, so revolutionary, filled my mind. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This was it, the ultimate price, the choice for Christ. My body might burn, my life might end, but my faith, my soul, would endure. The curiosity gap, the question of whether I would survive, was answered. I would not, in the earthly sense, but in a far greater sense, I would. My story, like so many others, was just beginning. The final act of my earthly life became the first act of my eternal one, a final, defiant testimony. Decades passed, weaving themselves into the fabric of time, each year etching deeper lines onto the faces of those who remembered, but also, miraculously, a profound, unshakable peace into the souls of those who chose to follow. The harsh light of Roman persecution eventually waned, but the seeds sown in blood and sacrifice took root. The ground had been watered by the tears and the blood of martyrs, creating fertile soil for a faith that would one day overshadow the very empire that sought to crush it. The memory of Marcus the carpenter and countless others like him, ordinary people who had faced extraordinary tests, became a whispered legend among the growing Christian communities. Their lives, though tragically cut short in those brutal 24 hours, became the very soil from which the church would grow. They did not last in the earthly sense, but their faith, their courage, their ultimate devotion outlasted the empire itself. They were not just victims, they were foundational pillars. The persecution had passed, and yet the Christian message had only grown stronger. It was a paradox that baffled the Roman world. Emperors rose and fell, grand monuments crumbled, but the quiet, persistent faith of those who had willingly embraced the cross continued to spread, quietly transforming hearts and minds. The very names of apostles like Peter and Paul, who had met their own gruesome ends in Rome around this same period. Peter, crucified upside down, Paul beheaded, became symbols of enduring truth, not defeat. Their teachings, written in letters that circulated among believers, became the bedrock of a new way of life, a life built not on earthly power, but on divine love, on sacrifice, and on the promise of eternal life. The moral of this story, the lasting legacy of those first terrifying 24 hours, is not one of defeat, but of transcendent victory. The sacrifice of these people became the very seed from which the faith blossomed, growing stronger with every attempt to extinguish it. You asked if you would last 24 hours as a Christian in Roman times. The answer is, statistically, probably not. It required a superhuman endurance, yes, but more importantly, a divine strength, a steadfast faith that transcended all earthly fear and pain, all worldly allure and comfort. It demanded a radical transformation of priorities, a willingness to surrender everything for an unseen kingdom. We are left with a powerful, echoing question. Would we today, in our comparatively comfortable and safe world, possess such courage for our convictions? Would we be willing to pay the ultimate price for our beliefs, to risk everything for a truth that demands ultimate allegiance? The answer is not in our strength, but in the strength of what we choose to believe and the source of that belief. Rome has fallen, its temples are ruins, its emperors are dust, but the message of Christianity, forged in the fires of persecution, carried forward by ordinary people who chose an extraordinary path, has survived centuries. It continues to offer hope, resilience, and a profound spiritual victory, even in the face of apparent earthly defeat. It is a testament to a kingdom that transcends all earthly empires and a love that conquers even death itself.